Welcome to Waterworld. It doesn't rain much in California, but everyone's always wet. The drug in discussion is PCP, also known as water in its liquid form. It is a scarce drug to find these days aside from certain areas in California and parts of the East Coast. Before I share my experience, I offer a fair warning. PCP is unlike any other drug I have ever heard of or experienced. It affects everyone differently from my experience, and while some can enjoy it and find it pleasurable, others become extremely disoriented and find the effects overwhelming, sometimes to the point of freakouts. With this in mind, come with me as we stroll down the dark and twisted memories of my encounters with Sherm. I was always interested in PCP growing up. I tried various hallucinogens and smoked pot daily since age 13, but for some reason, the negative dark stigma the media associated with PCP lured me in. At age 17, I got my first chance to try it. I'd met a local blood member, set at a party, and got his number after a couple of hours of drinking and sharing blunts with him. He informed me he had wet all day, so I called him 2 or 3 days later and set up a deal for a dip. We met up at a local Target store and sat down on the wall behind it. He pulled out a Newport 100 cigarette and a small brown bottle he called a vial. I handed him the cash and he unscrewed the bottle lid, revealing a neck hole just the size for a cigarette to fit into. I immediately smelled a strong chemical odor which can best be described as a mix between acetone and Sharpie marker. The smell stung my nose, but I instantly loved it. He then rolled the cigarette between his fingers to loosen the tobacco and dunked the cigarette into the vial about a quarter of the way down. He then quickly pulled it out and began drawing through it repeatedly to get the liquid to travel up the cig. He repeated this 2 more times and the entire cigarette was wet and brown to the filter. He placed the dip into his mouth and ripped the filter out with his teeth, lit another cig, and passed the dip to me. He explained that an open flame could not touch the water or it would flame up and waste the dip, so he passed the other cig to me and I placed the cherry of it to the tip of the water. After a few pulls, I inhaled deeply and felt a cool, slight numbing tingle throughout my throat and lungs. The taste can be described as eating a magic marker ink cartridge, except slightly more metallic. I passed the dip back to my supplier and looked up to the sky. The first effects were felt within 3 to 4 minutes and came on very strangely. At first, I felt numb. My mouth, my stomach, lungs, fingers, and almost all skin is numb. Obviously, the chemical was first created as an anesthetic, and it is a very good one indeed. The next thing I notice is that I'm beginning to daydream. I completely lose track of whatever conversation I was currently having or whatever thought was currently in my head. I felt a floating sensation and suddenly the drug peaks. Keep in mind that by this time, the dip is getting passed back to you for the 3rd or 4th time, and I don't want to act like a punk, so I take another pull. This stage, after 6 to 8 hits, is what I call dusted. Walking is practically impossible. Vision is extremely blurry and somewhat strobe-like, and weird noises sound from far away. The feeling is like being in a dream. You can see everything around you and somewhat recognize what it is, but it all looks foreign and strange. Words sound strange, and speaking feels weird. Nothing seems real. Everything seems slightly dark and grim with a sadistic undertone, but at the same time I felt invincible, courageous, and impervious to anything. At one point during the smoke out, I began to think of my parents and siblings, and I realized I'd forgotten who they were. I could picture their faces in my mind, but couldn't associate any names or memories with them. I could slightly remember my name and who I was, yet I couldn't. I lost my connection with reality, my point of living, and what life even was. Yet I wasn't scared or worried. I absolutely loved it. These newfound realizations swirled through my head, and I just sat on the wall with a dead blank stare on my face for about 20 minutes, known as getting stuck. By this time, we finished the dip off, and I thanked my supplier and headed to my friend's house. I was totally out of my mind on the walk, but I loved it. I felt as if I was floating above myself, watching myself walk in a fantasy world, and it was an amazing experience. The effects lasted 3 or 4 hours, and the come down was a gentle and smooth ease back into reality. I slept fine that night and found no residual effects or hangover the next day. My lungs were fine as well and didn't seem all irritated by the harsh chemical. I smoked water 5 or 6 times after that within the next couple of months until my supplier was killed in a drive-by shooting mid-August 2010. Since then, I've yet to find anyone with connections to water, but I eagerly await the day I can try some again. It is such a surreal and mystical experience that I absolutely love, and I know that the memories of these trips will stay in my mind forever. In conclusion, I'd like to sum the entire drug in 2 lines from the New York Sherm rapper Tame 1. I dipped my cigarettes in the most wicked of liquids, and it had my blacking out just like 6 solar eclipses. Peace, love, and dope.